Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the Man at YouTube with another honing your airbrush skills video and tips and all that sort of stuff. We're going to be talking about overspray. I am aware that a lot of people have experienced and through trial and error learnt ways around it and how to prevent orange peel, build-up of paint and other issues that can mechanically occur from your airbrush, though there's not a lot of talk or resources on why this occurs and breaking it down from a paint and mechanical standpoint, as well as extended oversprays such as your work area or spray booth slowly discoloring or getting dirty. Overspray is the soft edge of the line or painted blob intended, and the paint pretty much building up or misted on beyond that line. Different mixtures of thinner paints and airbrushes can tighten or extend that line. This picture as example. This video is for those who are quite experienced and gone through the growing pains of learning an airbrush. They've got a few models under their belt, but they're looking to improve and further their repertoire, or those trying to perfect a wet gloss look with no flaws, imperfections as a paint finish. Is this a bit too advanced? Do you not know what orange peel is? Through attempts of getting any sort of a finish, especially gloss, and you're getting a finish like this or far more exaggerated, be sure to watch this video first before continuing with this one. If you have not experienced or unaware of exactly what orange peel is, please watch my video what it is and how to prevent it. It lightly covers on the output, but mostly revolved around what you can do to prevent it and improve a smoother paint finish. If your part is dried, painted and already has orange peel, instead of stripping the paint, consider repairing the damage through polishing and sanding. This video will cover that. You can keep on repairing it, though mastering your airbrushing to the point where sanding and polishing is not required definitely cuts down on time and increases the enjoyment of the hobby. Both video links will be in the description below. This all started when I was coaching my friend Dante at Animasia. Been showing him the ropes on modelling and airbrushing for a little while now. He was spraying lacquer black on a Zaku Warrior no grade and achieved a beautiful gloss sheen on it, no problems, using guy notes heavily thinned with lacquer. Unfortunately, what he's done is put all of his wet and drying parts on a styrofoam board right in front of the spray booth that was sucking in air and spraying in that direction. As he was achieving a wonderful finish, he was darting all sorts of dried paint debris, orange peel and air all over those parts. Once they all dried and the sheen of the thinner evaporated, all the parts were terribly orange peeled. He blamed the paints and everything else. Not knowing what he can't see is doing harm, and instead fault finding and blaming everything from the airbrush to the paint not working well to having the wrong thinning ratio or PSI. The airbrush to use, which is pretty much the same pattern as 90% of us are operating, a standard gravity feed double-action airbrush with a 0.3mm needle and nozzle. The mechanics of them are practically universal, and more than 50% of them share the same threads and parts. Paint atomization via a double-action airbrush can be a fairly complicated process to comprehend, especially for a beginner, though something as we break down the process and learn step by step, we have a greater understanding. The double-action airbrush, at least at the point of view of the two inputs, is very, very simple. A plunger trigger opens and closes a valve to allow air in. Paint is fed through the top and pulling the trigger back, tightening on the needle, mixes the paint with the air as the air siphons the paint out through the nozzle. As an airbrush is engineered to the point that it is airtight and liquid tight with a very fine tolerance, some better than others depending on the make, model and brand, you can bet due to the very tiny openings, a fraction of a millimeter, a lot of things can go wrong, including the most common elements of the paint leaking past the needle O-ring, a blockage near the nozzle, the air valve being jammed, or air blowing back into the paint cup. Don't forget the finest and weakest elements, the needle, the nozzle and the fitting of the crown can spin the whole output. Even though it's flowing paint outside of it correctly into a mist, can break up the whole relationship of the atomizing process. Just past the paint cup, you'll notice there's a bit of a bend in your airbrush at the very bottom. That's the air line distributing to near the cap and surrounding the inner paint shroud and the nozzle and coming out just on the outer edge of the crown and opening. If you pull the crown off, or especially the airbrushes that pull apart past the nozzle, you'll see two tiny brass pins is where the air exits. As that flows out, it drags the paint out only when the needle is pulled back. The shape of the crown, the opening of the needle and nozzle, depending on how far you pull that, how much air you're forcing through, how thin the paint is, pretty much nuts out the pattern that you're spraying out. If it's quite dry, a tiny opening and a very small line, or you're going full ball and covering a large surface with a thick layer of paint at the consistency of milk, or something that's a little over watered down and going a little transparent and runny. Now let's assume perfect conditions. Your paint's properly thinned and of the same consistency, your airbrush is working correctly without blockages or where the air is ideal at the correct PSI. We're going to be looking at the standard coverage of paint opposed to anything that's overly watered down, following any tips to prevent orange peel or too dry. Sometimes, especially when your needle and nozzle is not quite right, you have a tendency of flooding your crown. This needs to be checked quite frequently during spraying to prevent pushing larger particles of paint or disrupting your standard flow and pattern and allowing paint to build up, dry and land on your surface. All of that is pretty much covered, though it does disturb the whole fault finding process. So under perfect conditions, PSI and ratio, when you're colouring a part and you're only wishing to colour it in a double wet coat and cover it evenly with paint, you'll notice that you have just enough of an opening to get a pattern of coverage, as well as a good distance that it applies wet without breaking the surface tension of the putty state of the paint on a part. If you were to pull it further back, that's where more air mixes with more paint and the whole orange peel drying occurs. You've got your distance that's ideal for wet coats, very very close, adjust ratio and air to suit, and you pull back to dust for a matte coat, gradient shading or any other effect. Distance is important. The output or coverage of your airbrush is also important. Premium branded or the top end airbrushes has a very small pattern, and the overspray ratio is quite tight for ideal sign writing style, very thin lines and a smoother gradient. They have their advantages and disadvantages, as any tool, depending on the job. Very good for detailing, very good for fine misting. A standard airbrush can be manipulated, adjusted and worked around to perform the perfect output and work. You may also want to experiment and experience a much wider nozzle and needle, which would give you a far wider wet coat range of spraying. Do remember, the wider your spray pattern, the wider the overspray pattern is as well. It goes to whatever part, being small or large, that you're spraying, and tactic that you decide to overcome these issues depend on what's the correct tool to use for the job. This finally goes under your experience, rather than getting recommendations by other people that have a far different approach to airbrushing as you would undertake using different resources and conditions. So we've discussed that the inputs are important, but the most important aspects of the mechanical integrity of the tool you are using, as well as the different ranges of outputs and types of brushes you can employ. Let's talk about the finish once applied on the part, how it looks and why has it turned that way. What most people are achieving, if it's their end goal, showroom car, very shiny Gundam, is a gloss wet look that as tension and tight as a water surface or something that's quite wet. You've got a nice glint, sheen, and it's absolutely flawless. That's what we've got on the left. The right is sometimes what you achieve if there's lint, the paint is dirty, the surface is not properly prepared, or you have orange peel. So you've got a frosted orange peel surface. Is it the end of the world? Clearly not. We've discussed this quite frequently in many other videos and done demonstrations and whatnot. However, it is resource intensive and definitely time intensive. We don't want to be repairing it all the time. So each time we spray, we practice, we pick up a spoon or a kit, we keep pushing ourselves to improve to get that nice wet look. And it's just fine adjustments until you get it just quite right and have the perfect understanding of the mechanics and the science of atomization to know where to fault find and improve yourself. It's a bit of a self journey, and promoted through my Honing Your Airbrush Skills video. Constant testing, practice, painting lines, painting surfaces, painting anything will drive you to improve. This is an over-exaggerated reference to a surface, a paint and a clear coat. Why sanding works so well, and polishing. Even if you get a good finish, you may still want to achieve it. You might get that one tiny mistake. You can fix it and you can make it absolutely universal. Each layer would be a fraction of a millimeter, though it's just done it so you can visually appreciate what's going on in theory. If the primed surface or the painted surface has lint, any sort of dust buildup, any sort of orange peel or whatnot, every layer of paint you put over it amplifies it, and if anything starts to clog detail, articulation, cause other problems. Keep applying more and more coats is not exactly going to fix it, though whatever state the paint is in, as long as you cut the clear coat, it's definitely salvageable. If you're unhappy with orange peel or the state of your paint coat, apply a clear coat or two, allow the maximum amount of time for drying and hardening. Sanding slightly wet or cured clear coat will only blend it and mix it with the paint coat underneath, especially if it's lacquer, and that is going to cause a further problem that will result in needing to strip the paint and start again. Once absolutely hardened, sand it with 1000 grit, very low pressure, and build your way up to the higher grits until the surface is nice and flat. it's been cut of any bumps or ridges or tears. Apply a second clear coat and you'll have the exact same finish or result as if you sprayed it perfectly in the first place. However, sometimes just due to the conditions or how massive a piece is, or your airbrush isn't just exactly up to par, quite an unusual or curved piece, only certain aspects or areas that might be imperfect, you can just sand that small area or that one problem, clear the whole thing, it's still going to look pretty good. Now, we've talked about just applying one coat, and that being an ideal bumpy, not quite right, or a clear, and that not being quite right and just destroying the finish. What if we're dealing with multiple colors? You paint a surface red and you want camouflage effect of blue on top, a soft edge. That's not too bad. You spray what you want, you get the fuzz out, it's blending from a red to a clean blue. It's looking really good. If the orange peel is really bad, or the crown nozzle needle is not quite right, the orange peel and the overspray particles could be so thick it's noticeable and it's very, very ugly, opposed to a very fine, beautiful mist of a nice gradient. That's when some of these steps need to be employed for a better atomized within wet coat range of a nice coat of paint, a nice soft edge leading to another coat of paint, clear coat, polish or matte to taste. Think tanks, plain, soft edge camouflage, that sort of thing. Just because you got a bit of a fuzz or a soft edge doesn't mean you can be quite lazy and spray away. It needs to be as tight and well executed as if you were attempting to do the high gloss sheen in just colouring in a piece. Many of these issues can be averted from regular maintenance and promptly experimentation and testing on a piece of paper of doing lines and whatnot between coats, colours, and just before you start spraying. Now, you want a hard edge, a pinstripe, a line, a panel on a Gundam or something. A soft edge won't cut it, and if you pull back or you got detail that's very close, you're going to have the colour of the paint spill over, and every coat gets thicker and thicker. Look at your spraying area, your extractor booth, those areas, and you've got this build up of a very ugly greenish grey paint. If you spray within nearer parts, it starts to get a slight tint of the colour that you're spraying. Two different colours, overspray wise, do not mix, and if you only want to get a small area painted, generally masking is always required with the proper steps outlined in amount of drying time, application, the correct paints, layering, surface preparation and priming, of course, considered. Do note, if you use tape or a fluid and build up paint, it's going to build up as a step or a line depending on how thick you apply and you pull the tape back, leaving a slight ridge. This could be easily averted if very small, putting a clear coat over it and you get a nice sheen across. If quite thick, a few clear coats and buff sand back if you were dealing with any other issue. Not a big deal. Same thing with decals. If it's a bit too thick and it stands out, few clear coats and a buff solves absolutely everything, followed by another clear coat, images as evident. A definite word of warning when applying a colour on top of a colour overspray wise, you can be sloppy with clear coats or the same colour, buff back and apply another clear coat. If you have overspray of a contrasting colour on top of each other, that could be far more difficult to repair, fix, or may just require complete repainting again, especially if the surface is quite wide, and if you notice a angled or a curved edge that might pick up paint many centimeters away from the model. So when you're masking, don't mask 1 or 2 centimeters within the edges that you're spraying. mask the whole surface that you can face. Remember Dante's original story of spraying in the general direction of the extractor booth and parts being close. This concludes the video. I do apologise for a very dry theory video with very bad MS Paint drawings, though I'm hoping that it visualises just right in your way of thinking or approaching things and having a better understanding when you come across a fault, an issue, a problem, and you're counting back how to fix it. This is one aspect out of chemicals not being quite compatible and other mechanical issues. Thank you very much for watching. As always, until next time, stay tuned for further videos. I'm happy to listen to suggestions or stories or whatnot in the comment section. Might give me ideas to tackle airbrushing theories or videos in another direction, such as what Dante brought to my attention. I am still very new to this aspect of airbrushing myself. I've only been playing around and trying with high gloss sheen and gradient spraying, so I'm not perfect, and each of the models that I'm showing right here with a shiny finish has had some sort of issue, fault, damage or whatnot, and required the whole polish and top coat. I've got a long way to go in this journey as well, and I'm trying to gather a better understanding, theory and whatnot, and definitely invite you guys to go on the journey with me to the purpose of this whole series of video making ideas, thoughts and theories. In the past, very clean high gloss models did scare me. I tend to have a very approach to weathering dirty kits or sloppy attempts and hiding it with weathering. I just had a bit of a play experiment, pushed and just grew little by little. I'm very happy that I can achieve very clean, very glossy kits, and I'm experimenting with clean glossy kits as well as slight wear, tear and weathering, as I've seen in some of the Masters works, Mr. Kawaguchi and some magazines. So I'm going to keep changing, improving, whatnot, using metallics, using candies, weathering as well as shading, and seeing where things take me. It's definitely quite interesting, and just piecing everything together from surface prep and building all the way to the paint and the clear coat stage.